and it's my privilege today to introduce our speaker. Speaker today began her law enforcement career in Georgia as a police officer, and for the past 15 years she's worked with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and was promoted in 2007 to Assistant Special Agent in Charge in the Tennessee State Fusion Center. She's overseen the following programs in Tennessee: the statewide Amber Alert and Missing Children's Clearinghouse, Gang Intelligence, the TBI Top 10 Most Wanted, and the Sex Offender Registry. She oversaw the publication of the groundbreaking report, Tennessee Human Sex Trafficking and Its Impact on Children and Youth. The report has resulted in the passage of dozens of new laws in Tennessee. Some of her accolades include: she was named the 2000 TBI Agent of the Year for the TBI Drug Investigation Division. She received the 1999 and 2001 FBI Recognition Award for Outstanding Contributions in Drug Enforcement. The Department of Justice named her the 2009 Amber Alert Coordinator of the Year for the United States. And in 2010, she was a graduate of the FBI National Academy. We're privileged today to have her as our speaker. Please welcome Margie Quin.
Thank you, and I'm excited to be here at Vanderbilt. I have to tell you, I'm a little nervous about addressing folks from a medical standpoint. Most of what I do has been law enforcement and social services, so this has been a little bit of a different subject matter for me, but I think it's one that Dr. Annette Tedford, who works with me over at TBI, has helped me research. And I think my goal here today is to talk to you about what human trafficking is, so that you come to an understanding of what it is and what it looks like here in our state in Tennessee, and give you some resources as nurses and medical practitioners of where you can go to get additional information that will be more pertinent to your particular field. So hopefully we'll accomplish those couple of things as we move forward. I'm going to start by giving you kind of a 30,000-foot view of human trafficking in our state and in our nation, and then we'll kind of narrow down into the focus of how I think it's going to affect you in the medical profession. Sound? That particular video was filmed in the red light district in Amsterdam, and I probably don't have to talk very long today to convince you that human trafficking occurs in places like Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, in Amsterdam, in Mumbai. But does it happen in the United States? Does it happen here in the state of Tennessee, in Nashville? Is it urban or is it rural? These are the questions I think we sought to answer in response to the legislature's request that we complete a quantitative study on human sex trafficking. I'm going to start today out with just giving you a general definition of what human trafficking is, so as we move forward, we're all singing off the same sheet of music. Both the federal law and the state law say that human trafficking occurs when a person is over 18 years of age, engages in a commercial sex act, and the government can prove force, fraud, or coercion. So over 18, a commercial sex act and force, fraud, or coercion is present. Under 18 years of age, a commercial sex act occurs, period. Period. No force, no fraud, no coercion. Under 18, a commercial sex act. Now, what is a commercial sex act? The law further defines a commercial sex act as one where a sex act occurs and something of value is exchanged. A sex act and something of value is exchanged. So what is value? What's value? Well, money, but it could be drugs, it could be liquor, it could be housing, it could be clothing, it could be drugs, if you're addicted to drugs. Anything of value that is exchanged for a sex act is considered a commercial sex act. And when that person is under 18 years of age, and it does not matter if they are willing, the law makes no distinction about that. So once a commercial sex act occurs, and the person is under 18 years of age, that is a human trafficking offense. It is not prostitution. It's not child prostitution. It's human sex trafficking. The TVPA, the Trafficking for Victims Protection Act, was passed by the United States Congress in 2004. Our state statute came along in 2007. So these are relatively new laws, both for the United States and for the state of Tennessee. And as with anything else, it takes a few years, I think, for us to catch up to what these laws really mean for us. And as Susan talked about in the introduction, there have been dozens of new laws and tweaks to the laws within the TCA that we'll talk a little bit more about as we go forward. Does anybody have any questions about what the definition of human trafficking is? Yes, ma'am. Right. Well, prostitution, there is no such thing as prostitution if you're under 18 years of age. The state has decriminalized prostitution for minors, so that's not even an offense on the books. Juveniles cannot be charged with prostitution. And you're thinking to yourself, really? We were charging kids with prostitution? Yes. We were charging kids as young as 13 with prostitution in this state. In fact, between 2009 and 2010, Memphis PD charged 50 juveniles with prostitution between the ages of 13 and 17. Most were repeat offenders, and the average age was 15. Now, once you get over 18 years of age, a person can willingly engage in a commercial sex act. But if they are forced or coerced, or if fraud is committed in order to force you into engaging in that commercial sex act, then human trafficking occurs. And these will be, I think, become a little more clear as we move through the presentation. But keeping in mind, I think that prostitution is inherently an extremely violent profession, extremely violent. We, I think, have to ask ourselves, not only as a society, but within our own professions, what really is the difference between prostitution and human sex trafficking? And are the lines so blurred that one becomes the other kind of in the blink of an eye? Now, Margie Quin is not standing up here advocating to legalize prostitution. Don't leave here and say, Margie Quin of the TBI wants to legalize prostitution. I guess I don't understand what your question is. They're two separate, we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about victims over 18 and victims under 18. Under 18 is a whole separate deal, no prostitution there. Over 18, a commercial sex act occurs and the government can prove force, fraud, or coercion. If we can't prove force, fraud, or coercion, or that does not exist, then it is prostitution. And it is also an illegal act, obviously. Right. But the prostitute can still willingly engage in that without the presence of force, fraud, or coercion. Just because she is performing the act for another person or in conjunction with another person doesn't necessarily make human sex trafficking. That can still be prostitution and promoting prostitution. But once that pimp hits her, deprives her of food, isolates her, threatens her, then you've crossed over the line into human sex trafficking. And my theory is that many times the lines are so blurred. Exactly. It's what you can prove and what you can't prove. Exactly. you wake up one morning and you go, gosh, yeah, I think I want to have sex with 8 different men a night. That sounds good to me. Right. Right. So let's talk about the human sex trafficking study for a few minutes so that we understand what it looks like in the state of Tennessee. We all wouldn't be sitting here today if this study weren't out there. Vanderbilt and TBI collaborated on this human sex trafficking study, which was released in May of 2011. It was as a result of a public chapter that was passed by the legislature in June of 2010, Public Chapter 1023, which called for a quantitative overview of human sex trafficking. And when they asked the TBI to complete the report, they also requested that we partner with Vanderbilt Center for Community Studies because they had helped write the public chapter. We embraced that request and partnered with the folks over at the Community Studies and brought on board PhD candidates and master's students with civil rights degrees and gender studies degrees that were really focused in on the human trafficking issue. That became a great collaboration for us because honestly, I think whenever you can get academia and law enforcement to agree on something, then you've probably accomplished something, because usually those two are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think both the TBI and Vanderbilt had a great working relationship and are in total agreement about the results of the study. The public chapter called for a quantitative overview, and then they had quite a number of questions they wanted answered. But their main focus was, what is the impact on children and youth of human sex trafficking? That was really the question that they were after. How much of it is occurring, and what is the impact on children and youth? So we took a three-pronged measured approach in order to answer the questions that were posed to us by the public chapter. The first initiative was to use a questionnaire, and we sent that out to all law enforcement agencies, DCS caseworkers, guardians ad litem, juvenile court clerks, the main entities within our state that we thought could answer the questions, quantifying questions about human sex trafficking. The second initiative was to do focus group meetings across the state, and we held 3, one in Memphis, one in Nashville, and one in Knoxville, where we called together subject matter experts, anybody we thought could bring some information to the table with regards to human trafficking, because some of the information that the legislature wanted was subjective in nature and was going to be difficult to get at through a sort of sterile questionnaire or survey. We also included medical personnel, treatment counselors in these focus groups. The third initiative was to provide case studies so that when reading the report and analyzing the data and the numbers that came out of the trafficking report, we don't forget that each number and each graph represents a human being. It represents a person in our state. So with regards to the survey, there were 371 law enforcement representatives surveyed, 134 court reps, 47 group home, DCS group home managers, about 2,400 DCS caseworkers, and about 1,500 guardians ad litem. That's who the survey was sent to. And these were the results. So every county in red is a county that reported at least one case of human sex trafficking over a 24-month period. And we did limit the study to a 24-month period. That's 85% of Tennessee's counties. So when analyzing that result, I had to take into consideration that theft affects 100% of our counties, and rape affects 100% of our counties. Domestic violence certainly affects 100% of our counties. So what that human sex trafficking affects 85% of our counties? Well, in blue is every county in 2009 that reported the presence of gangs in their jurisdiction. Arguably, we get ourselves as a society all whipped up into a frenzy over gangs, and we should. But nobody's whipped up into a frenzy over human sex trafficking, but perhaps we should be. So what are the stakes? Again, why are we even talking about this issue? Well, the stakes are our kids. As I said before, Memphis was arresting kids as young as 13 for prostitution in our state. We know that, at least in Nashville, the youngest victim that's been recovered has been 9 years old. And we know anecdotally that those numbers are younger and younger because we have interviewed victims who remember as far back as 5. 5 being sold by their parents or their families. Usually by 13, they're out on the street. I had lunch two weeks ago with 2 women who are survivors have been through the Magdalene program, which some of you may be familiar with. Both were abused sexually in their homes at the age of 5. The one that's from Nashville here, her mother sold her to her drug dealer at 13, and she was his property until she was 22. These are the kinds of conditions that these young girls and women are being exposed to and brought up in and abused. This is the impact we're trying to measure on that particular girl. These were the numbers that were reported in the study with regards to minors in our state. So when we asked the question, how many cases have you seen, we gave folks an option, a multiple choice answer, if you will. So they could answer 1 to 5 cases, 6 to 15, 16 to 25, 26 to 50, 51 to 100, and over 100 cases of minor human sex trafficking. So in bright yellow is over 100 cases of minor human sex trafficking. That's Shelby, Davidson, Coffee, and Knox counties. But I'd like to draw your particular attention to Lake County. That's the top northwest tip of our state, Lake County. Can anybody tell me what's in Lake County? I'll give you a hint, it's wet. It's a lake. Reelfoot Lake, that's about the only thing that's in Lake County. It's a very rural population, less than 50,000. They reported 6 to 15 cases of minor human sex trafficking over a 24-month period. And that tells us 2 things. If it's in Lake County, it's not an urban problem. And I think that's what our perception was. The results to me were very surprising. They shattered quite a number of ideals and thoughts and myths that I think that I had bought into as well, that this was an urban problem, this was a foreign national problem. Well, there's not been an influx of Eastern Europeans or Southeast Asians into Lake County. I'm pretty sure we'd have heard. So that means this is neither a foreign national problem, nor is it an urban problem. And that's why I think you see it spread out across our state the way it is. Now, does it look different in urban counties as versus rural counties? Yes, the crime is committed differently and has a different modus operandi, if you will. But it's still trafficking, and it's still occurring. And while we're talking about this word trafficking, I think people think that that automatically means movement, and it does not. If you notice in the definition, nowhere did it say that the victim had to be transported anywhere. She can be victimized right out of her home, right out of the home and the bedroom that she grows up in and sleeps in every single night. There needs to be no transportation and no trafficking. Trafficking, I think, really is more of a reference to commerce than it is about movement. These are some of the new laws that have come on board here in the state of Tennessee. And I think there are a few that are quite noteworthy just in this legislative session. Some of these will be moved into law as of July 1st of this year. And one is, and I think when you talk about the human trafficking statute, which is 39-13-309, there's a fairly big laundry list of things that you can prove to prove trafficking. It's harbors, transports, entices, promotes, in order to prove trafficking. Obtains is one of those words. And we've long suspected that obtains, the true intent of that would be the John, the purchaser. Not the person we typically think of as a trafficker, which is the person who's promoting the prostitution of a child, but the person who is actually buying the sex with a child. And in January, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals said, yes, obtains refers to the person that's buying the sex from a 14-year-old. But in order to make that crystal clear, the legislature added purchasing to that laundry list of things that we can use to prove human trafficking. So I think it's very clear in this state what the legislative intent is, and that is that we can and should be charging and convicting men and women for the purchase of sex for a minor. The other thing I think that's particularly noteworthy is that it removes the defense of ignorance or mistake of fact regarding age of a minor. So in other words, the government does not have to prove that the trafficker, and we've just established that the trafficker is either the promoter or the purchaser. The government does not need to establish that the trafficker knew the age of the victim, knew that the victim was underage. So none of this, oh, I didn't know she wasn't 18. That will not fly in our state anymore. And in fact, the 2nd Circuit Court of Appeals last December said in a case there that the government need not prove that the trafficker knew the child was under 18. The threshold is if they had a reasonable opportunity to observe the victim, that was enough. They should realize that person was under 18. So a reasonable opportunity to observe the victim, I'm thinking, is a couple of minutes. Could be a picture. You know, if you saw a picture of that child on the internet. These are the things I think that have to be further litigated, but it seems pretty clear the intent of both the legislature and the appellate courts that they're going to decide very strongly in favor of the protection of children. A couple other things you guys might think are interesting. It adds various sexual offenses to organized crime definitions, adds various offenses to the criminal gang offense. Human trafficking was added to the criminal gang offense. Promoting the prostitution of a minor is now linked in our statute so that promoting the prostitution of a minor and human sex trafficking are virtually the same thing, and they are either Class A or B felonies, depending on the age of the victim. Now, this is huge because 3 years ago, this was a Class A misdemeanor. You could sell a 14-year-old for sex, and it was a misdemeanor in our state, and now it's a Class A or B felony. That's a huge change in our law. Disallows the defense of consent by a minor. In other words, you can't say, well, she consented or she was willing. You can't use that as a defense. Provides grounds for the termination of a person's parental rights. So once you are convicted of sex trafficking your children or your child, you automatically terminate the parental rights of that individual. And not only for the juvenile that they sex trafficked, but for all their children. All their biological children are immediately removed and rights are immediately terminated upon conviction. There's one that allows some victims 13 and under to testify outside the courtroom by CCTV instead of having to face their trafficker. This is a particularly brutal crime. There's a lot of brainwashing and manipulation that goes on with the victims of this crime. And so having them be able to testify outside the courtroom, I think, is a huge bonus for these kids, for the well-being of these children. So why do we have so many kids? Why are the reported numbers so high? 1,500 to 3,500 minors trafficked in our state, according to our study. Those are huge numbers. Well, some of it is because these are runaways. NISMART, which is the National Incident Studies for Missing, Abducted, Runaways, and Throwaways, they're the NISMART 1, 2, and 3 are the most quoted studies in the world with regards to the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And they tell us that within 48 hours of a run incident, 1 in 3 children are lured for the purposes of commercial sexual exploitation. 1 in 3. So what does that mean for the state of Tennessee? Well, there are between 600 and 900 kids reported missing every month in our state. Every month. Roughly 50% of those are runaways. That means about 1,400 kids a year at risk for commercial sexual exploitation just by virtue of being a runaway. These are the numbers of calls that are coming into the National Runaway Switchboard from homeless teenagers in the state of Tennessee. Those are huge numbers. That's a lot of homeless teens in our state. This is really the best chart I've seen. It was put out by OJJDP, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. I kind of stole it from them. But here you can see the cumulative risk factors and the progression, or how this kind of happens for kids. So you start out with family conflict, sexual and other abuse, runaway. And I will tell you from a personal experience that I've not seen a victim yet. Victims that I've talked to, cases that I know about, investigators that I've talked to, not only here in the state of Tennessee, but all over the country and in Canada and Mexico. I've not talked to anybody yet, anybody that doesn't say that there's childhood sexual abuse, there's childhood sexual trauma in that victim's past. That is a huge common denominator that runs through the victim population with regards to sex trafficking. So when we talk about sexual and other abuse, that is very, very common, and it should be a red flag for you. You're at high risk when you start to see school problems and truancy, substance abuse, and street life. If you've been in the medical profession any length of time or been in the ER, you've seen these kids come through. They are not pleasant. They are not friendly. They don't want your help. They are pretty street smart. They know it all. Many of them have criminal histories. They're drug abusers. They can be violent themselves. They can be adjudicated delinquent kids. But they are victims, and they should be treated as such. Substance abuse in street life. high risk, deviant peers, meets pimp. You know, this is the whole hanging out with the wrong crowd thing. Recruited and controlled into prostitution. Delinquent conduct occurs when you recruit other kids and you become the bottom girl. The bottom girl is a term that's used to refer to the girl that's actually sort of the top girl that works for a particular pimp. And he calls her his bottom girl. And she may deliver the younger girls to the hotel rooms. She may collect the money. She's also further insulation for the pimp between law enforcement and the criminal act. So at that point then, life of crime and addiction, and then lethality. NISMART also tells us that from the time at which a child is commercially sexually exploited, their life expectancy is 7 years. 7 years once commercial sexual exploitation occurs. Again, the crime of prostitution and sex trafficking is inherently violent, an extremely violent crime. So let's talk for a minute about adults. These were the numbers that were reported for adults. You can see that in 100 cases, Shelby, Madison, Lawrence, Davidson, Coffey, Franklin, Hamilton, Knox. This kind of surprised me because, again, you've got to be able to prove force, fraud, or coercion. And I think prostitution has such a stigma attached to it. But in thinking about it, and in thinking about that issue of force, fraud, or coercion, I started to think to myself, well, you know, if a prostitute wakes up one morning and she thinks to herself, you know, I'm not feeling all that great today. My back's kind of hurting and I feel like I'm coming down with something. And she tells her pimp, hey, I think I'll take the day off. I'm not feeling all that. Do you think she has that option? Do you think she can take the day off? Or does he respond and say, you don't work, you don't eat today? Or you don't work, I don't give you your fix? Or you don't work and I'm going to beat the stew out of you? That probably occurs. We know that occurs because anecdotally we hear that. I'm sure you all see it in the medical treatment profession. These girls that come in, you think it's domestic violence, but is it domestic violence? Or is it prostitution and or sex trafficking? Things that are masking as domestic violence, they are domestic violence, but they can also be prostitution and they can be human sex trafficking. So here's the number of convictions that were reported, which is a pretty sad number. So obviously when we saw these results, we said, you know what, that's a huge problem. We've got to do something to narrow the gap between identified cases and convictions. Because I'm here to tell you, somebody needs to go to jail. Somebody needs to go to jail for this crime. And not many folks have been going to jail for this crime. Why? Well, a couple of reasons, I think. One is training. We asked folks whether or not they thought their departments and agencies were adequately trained to recognize and identify cases of human sex trafficking. 79% said no. 79%. That's a problem. That's a problem. So what we did in answer to that was the TBI applied for some grant money to go out and start training. We had 2 classes in 2011. These are 8-hour post-certified classes, 7 in 2012, 6 in 2013. We did other trainings that were less than 8 hours, and the total participants that we've trained so far in the last 22 months has been 4,700 first reporters or first responders. I did a pretty large training at Jackson Regional Hospital. I've also done Madison County Regional Health Department. So we are getting into the medical communities as well, and those are part of those numbers. It still feels like, though, I think we probably have about, well, when you lump in the medical facility, what are you talking about, 50,000 maybe first reporters across the state, or higher than that? Right now it feels like we're kind of trying to fight a forest fire with a watering can. But things like this help when we videotape, and then we continue to push the training out to more and more people. Because obviously, if we're not trained to recognize it, we're not going to be able to do anything about it. We're not going to be able to solve the problem. I threw this in because I just think this is an interesting slide. We asked those folks from social services if they thought recruiting was going on within the DCS population. I can tell you that 71% of DCS caseworkers said yes, some form of recruiting was going on within the DCS population. That's girls recruiting other girls into trafficking. And that ought to keep you up nights. That's bad news.
something. If you pay the price, you can get what you want. I can get it for you.
Really?
Now, if you want something really young, that 200 will cost you. Just cost a little more than that.
Sure.
But how young you talking? Talk to me.
Well, how young do you have?
Well, I don't have nothing younger than 14.
Okay, no, 14 is good.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, you're gonna have to add something to that.
Sure.
What you willing to add to that too? Just talk to me.
Well, like I said, this is my first time out.
You know, now you.
So the girls over there cost 2, is that?
That's the women.
The women.
Now, if I told you 2, and you know you want something young, and I tell you just to add something to it, just tell me you just pick a figure to that.
Well, I guess what, 3?
3. If you do 3, you got it.
Definitely just a beat that's like, it'll probably stump you out, like when you're on the ground, physically stump you. Yeah. He'll probably hit you with a belt, physically slap you, punch you.
He would beat me with broomsticks, handles. He would burn me with candles. He would take metal hangers and beat me with them and poke me with them, belts, anything that he can get his hands on, he would beat me with. The one time he had beat me so bad that he had ruptured my spleen and it put me in the intensive care unit. So it's like, once you knew that he could almost kill you, you'd rather do what he says than to get beat again.
If you come to them, that'll be like 150.
Okay.
If they come to you out call, that'll be like 200.
Okay. And I got a hotel room, so that's an out call.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, so 200 each.
Yeah, an hour.
Okay, so I'll give you 400. Do I give them 200 or I give it to you?
Me, right
okay,
now.
so I'll give you 400, and then we can tip the girls whatever on top of that.
Yeah, okay, that's it.
Is that all right with you?
Hello, I run all this.
Okay.
These my girls.
Oh, okay.
They don't do nothing but look pretty and
We're all under 18. We're all the same age. There would be a few girls that I knew that were like in their 20s or whatever, but they had been doing it since they were our age anyways. I did wait till 12, and these girls were doing it since they were like 8 or 9, and now they're like 23.
I want to show them and tell them like what it feel like to be that hoe, to be degraded all the time, to be hit on, to be manipulated, to be sold all day, every day. Who was there to stop it? Nobody was there to stop it.
That undercover video was filmed in Atlanta, which is Chattanooga's a northern suburb, basically, of Atlanta. The State Department estimates that Atlanta is the #1 trafficking hub in the United States, and our closest city is about an hour and a half away. This is how we compare to other states across the country. We are one of the top tier states in the nation with regards to our comprehensive laws protecting children against commercial sexual exploitation. There will be new report cards released this fall, and we feel like that our 12 new pieces of legislation this year should put us into the top 5 states in the nation with regards to our laws against human trafficking. I think that's been one of the most long-term products of the sex trafficking report, is that we've been able to leverage that report into sweeping social and policy changes for our state. We really have a great opportunity here to lead the nation in our fight against human trafficking. And my motto is, why follow if you can lead, right?
I got started
when I was 13.
I was really young, and the people that fought me were people that were looking for, child fetishes.
There was like 15 of them in a room, and I was really scared.
He cut me with a knife to be able to penetrate me. I was only 5.
I was crying because I was scared, and he had sex with me, and that was my first time. I still had on my school uniform.
Men who come here to abuse children in Cambodia have 99.9% of the time already abused children in their own countries.
We as a nation are going to have to sit back, take a deep breath, and realize, oh my God, this is in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our communities. It's right under our noses.
We frequently see drugs and psychological brainwashing become part of the process of keeping them committed to the offender.
Men will actually fly into Atlanta, get on the internet, say, I want a boy who has no hair on his head, no hair anywhere, I want him to look like he's 13, I want him to be no taller than 5'2", order it, show up here, have sex, and be gone.
See, touched my arm and smiled.
The sexual exploitation of children has become a cottage industry, driven by the internet.
It's very difficult for us to define the problem of child pornography to the American public because it's something we obviously can't show them.
There are some of the acts that I couldn't even describe to you, against children so young that no normal person could look at that without being disturbed.
It ain't about sex. It just be about business, that's it. Once you get them to go the first time, then you got a better chance of getting them to keep going.
I was really nervous, and I was really scared, and he was holding his gun and shot me.
Cannot arrest 11, 12, and 13-year-olds and charge them with prostitution. Cannot criminalize children.
I think people view the prostitution like a victimless crime. Most of the girls that we come across nowadays are 13, 14, 15 years old. I know these girls didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to be a prostitute today.
There are millions and millions of photos of children who are being sexually abused. Nobody knows who these children are.
And it raises the question to us, are there that many pedophiles out there? Or is something else happening?
That video was produced a couple of years ago, several years ago now, by Steven Soderbergh and George Clooney about trafficking. It's old because right now we have 19,471 registered sex offenders in this state. And on any given day, up to 74% of those are on there for an offense against a minor. So when you talk about whether or not there's a demand in this state for children to have sex with, men that want to have sex with children, yes. And we don't have to look any further than the number of registered sex offenders in the state of Tennessee. This is an excerpt from a book called The Game, The Pimp Game. You can buy it on Amazon.com. She'll develop a feeling of accomplishment. The shopping after a month will be replaced with cash. The lovemaking turns into raw sex. She'll start to crave the intimacy and be willing to get back into your good graces. After you have broken her spirit, she has no sense of self-value. Now, pimp, put a price tag on the item you have manufactured. I include this because I want us to all be clear that this is about the money. This is about the business. This is not about love. This is not about affection. This is about the money. Now, the girl is going to think it's about love. She's going to think it's about affection. She's going to think it's about romance, at least in the beginning. There's a process that they call for prostitutes or human sex trafficking victims called seasoning. We've all heard the term grooming, right? Same thing. Seasoning is the process that a pimp puts a girl through to force her or to bring her to a point where she's willing to engage in prostitution for him. She's willing to engage in that commercial sex act for him. The next few slides, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think is probably pertinent to your particular profession. This is from Across the Room Assessments, Sex Trafficking, a Clinical Guide for Nurses. That's Springer Publishing Company. What you're going to see is a girl or a woman coming in with an older man or a woman, usually a younger patient. The person that brings them in is going to dominate that person. They're going to be the ones to answer the questions. You may see the individual kind of cower or look to them. Every time you ask your patient a question, they're going to look to that person first before they answer. This is a red flag for you. If a patient seems withdrawn, frightened, or conversely aggravated or agitated with signs of high anxiety, such as nail biting or fidgeting, all the way up into psychotic episode, those are going to be signs that they've been manipulated, coerced, brainwashed, severely abused. We got a call last month on the human trafficking hotline, which does ring into TBI, from the Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, about a 13-year-old. It came in with quite a number of sexually transmitted diseases. She was in a psychotic episode. We suspect strongly that she is a sex trafficking victim. Once with a patient, these are some additional indicators, accompanied by a companion who attempts to control the interview. You probably see that or you recognize that as being a sign of domestic violence issues. Again, it's going to be very similar for you with regards to control of an individual. Eyes downcast, poor eye contact with a provider, minimal conversation with providers. In other words, they're going to tell you as little as humanly possible to get their treatment. Vague story of how obtained injury or might change when told by a different staff member. We have learned this in law enforcement. We had a victim and we asked her, we said, has he ever hit you? No. Well, but he broke your ribs. He crushed your rib cage. He didn't hit you? No, he stomped on me. If you don't ask them a particular way, no, he didn't hit me. So more general questions like, has he ever harmed you? Has he ever caused you harm? Has he ever hurt you? Has he ever broken a bone? More general questions than, have you ever been hit? Have you ever been kicked? You'll see cigarette burns, boiling water burns, malnutrition, sleep deprivation, internal injuries, any sort of impact injury that could be caused by physical contact from a perpetrator. Facial fractures, other fractures, cuts and abrasions, sprains and bruises, burns from hot water, cigarettes, chemicals, malnourishment, that's a huge component of this. Gunshots, branding or scarring. These victims will be branded, they will be tattooed, they will have scars on their body from the beatings probably that they have taken. Questions regarding prior trauma. These are some suggestions that we have for you with regards to assessing the victim's prior trauma. Hit, kicked, slapped, choked. I mean, if you're going to go that specific, make sure you have a long laundry list, because if you don't hit the one he did, then she's not going to answer you or he's not going to answer you correctly. They're very literal, these victims are. Did this ever result in injury? Was medical treatment ever sought? This is a huge question for us. For instance, that juvenile that I talked to you about, where the crisis counselor called in from Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, she had presented the year before at 12 with the same symptoms. Now, the hospital notified DCS, notified Metro Police. I don't know what happened to the case after that, but she was seen at 4 other facilities between that time in March of 2012 and when she came back to Vanderbilt in March of 2013. So she had been seen at 6 facilities in a year. for her issues. So asking them where else they've been treated, have they been to other health departments, that's going to help us with a criminal investigation, because anytime we can document injury, then that goes towards proving force, fraud, or coercion on an adult, or just the underlying crime of trafficking for that juvenile. Have you ever had any broken bones, loss of consciousness, significant lacerations? We ask them too, do you lose time? In other words, are they blacking out? Do they lose significant periods of time in their life where they don't remember? Are they being drugged involuntarily? Those are good questions to ask. Ever had to exchange sex for money or food or shelter or anything like that? Those are great questions to ask. With regards to substance abuse, obtain the details of the types of abuse, alcohol abuse, frequency, patterns of use, withdrawal symptoms, if they're exhibiting withdrawal symptoms. What kind of things do you help to take you relax or chill out? Because you're medical personnel, they may tell you things that they're not going to tell a law enforcement person or even a DCS person. We're about interchangeable with regards to that juvenile. They're not going to care for either one of us. But you may be in a position as a medical professional to get information from them about their medical condition that we're not going to be able to obtain. Mental health screen, nightmares, difficulty sleeping, repetitive thoughts or images in your mind, times when you feel very anxious, panic attacks, high anxiety, periods of feeling sad or hopeless, thoughts of hurting yourself, any sort of cutting or self-mutilation is a great sign that abuse or trauma has occurred. And ask them about the circumstances that occurred under. These are some examples of branding and tattooing by pimps on their prostitutes or on kids. You see in the upper right-hand corner the barcodes, and this I would remind you of that quote that I just gave you from the pimp game. When I talk about the fact that this is a business, you saw a video where they talked about the fact that these individuals are products. This is the sale of a product, a reusable commodity. Not like guns or drugs, you sell them once and they're gone. A human being is a resellable, reusable commodity. So they will brand them with barcodes so that they understand that they are property, that they are nothing but a product to that pimp. A scroll is an ode to her pimp that he forced her to have tattooed on her back. You'll also see the pimp's name, his street name, either tattooed or branded. Any sort of derogatory tattoo on their lower back or across their chest, denoting property or worthlessness, is also a big sign of a trafficking victim. These are some of the statutes that regarding mandatory reporting for you that would fall under, I think, what's specific to your profession. Here's a little bit about HIPAA and the TCA with regards to reporting these incidents. I know that you are required to report to DCS if you suspect child abuse. This is child abuse. Human sex trafficking is child abuse. It is child sex abuse, and it should be reportable under those. The actual statute says that you can report to DCS or law enforcement. Your policy may say DCS, but you can always report to law enforcement. I don't know what your policy is at Vanderbilt, but the TCA, the Tennessee Code Annotated, says you can report to law enforcement. And under HIPAA, there is a law enforcement exception to medical records. Okay? So these are a couple of sections that would govern your reporting requirements or your reporting limitations. Let me just tell you a minute about our future research. We're doing some research about what similarities are occurring within the counties who are reporting the highest number of minors being trafficked. And of the 21 counties in our state that are reporting the highest numbers, 17 of those counties are rural counties. I'll tell you that if you're receiving government assistance or temporary government welfare, those counties, the highest numbers of counties that are receiving welfare for their population, are also the highest numbers of human sex trafficking victims. These kids are coming from impoverished households. So here's a great chart on the number of kids living below the poverty level as it relates to the highest numbers of counties that are reporting cases of human sex trafficking. So you can see Lake County out there, 45.7% of the children are living below the poverty level in Lake County. The national average is 22%. So in some cases, these counties are reporting twice the number, and this is the 2010 census, twice the number of kids living under the poverty level than the national average. And these are counties that are reporting the highest number of human sex trafficking victims. And when I presented these results to our director, he said, well, that's just common sense, Marge. And I said, well, yes, but now we can prove it, because here are the numbers. So impoverished households, poverty in need, runaway, homeless, this is a crime that's affecting children in state's custody disproportionately. That can also be an indicator for you as well. This is what it looks like in a rural county. Approximately 4 years ago, we successfully prosecuted a young adult for having sex with 4 minor girls. He was suspected of procuring these girls for prostitution. This is a rural community. Kids talk, adults talk, and families of the victims seem displeased because of the stigma. I believe that this makes it harder to prosecute in rural areas. That's Lake County law enforcement. This from Coffee County law enforcement. A father, he was abusing his daughters and then letting his friends participate for a fee. This is happening in our homes. Don't think that just because it's a parent that brought a child in that they're not in danger. We know statistically in our country that if a child is killed, they're most often killed by a parent or guardian. So we cannot assume that they're safe just because a parent or guardian has brought them in to a medical facility. I'm going to skip to a slideshow real quick, and then we'll be wrapping it up. Oh dear. Video plays. have a blue card that I gave you. Please use that. We were happy to bring you more. We printed 40,000 on the second run of those. We've already handed out 21,000 across the state, and our goal is to get one in the hands of every first reporter in the state of Tennessee, so that you have some place to start, even if you haven't been to training, some questions to ask, and a number to call to get help if you feel like you need it. Thank you very much for allowing me to come and share an hour with you. If you ever need anything from the TBI, please call us on the hotline, and we will be more than happy to come out and help you with anything that you need. Thank you.